remember the 5 pillars of the H30K method. We need to give them an experience. We need to give them meaning. We need to give them a transformation. We need to give them a journey, and we need to give them an invitation. And the first thing that I want to talk about tonight is the first pillar of the H30K method, which is we need to give them an experience. Okay, we need to give them an experience. And I'll tell you, when I quit my job and bought my first gun and became an instructor, my experience in the gun world was pretty significantly down. It was not a good experience at all, because I walked into a gun training classroom and there were no guns in the room. I literally sat there and listened to a guy speak for 3 hours straight. We didn't have our hands on firearms. We didn't have any sort of hands-on training. And that was a bad experience. So one of the ways that when I became a certified instructor, okay, and I started giving classes out of the spare bedroom of my home, I had a little classroom, a lot like somebody earlier in the room, had 12 people. I had 12 people in my classroom. And in order to get to my classroom, it was in the spare bedroom of my home on a 28-acre farm in the middle of Inverness, Florida, in the middle of nowhere. And most of my classes were night classes. So people had to drive out in the middle of the night to come out to this class. And to get to my house, it was a 1/4 mile long driveway to get to my classroom in my house, in my spare bedroom. And the 1/4 mile long driveway wrapped and winded through the dark woods of Inverness, Florida, through the swamp, literally through the swamp, to get to my house. And so by the time I had students show up to my classroom, they were scared. Not only were they nervous because they were dealing with firearms for the very first time often, but they were driving out into the middle of nowhere. I could have been an axe murderer for all they knew. And so when people would show up to these classes, I felt the nervousness. And I said to myself, there's got to be a better way. I've got to be able to do something about this. And so what I did was I said, I can't control my driveway. I can't control the path that they take to get here. But what I can control is the experience after they get here. And then I started making sure that I had classic rock playing, right? Music playing softly. So when they walked in, it sounded like a party. And who can argue with Zeppelin, right? You know, Skinner, who can argue with that, right? And then I even went a step beyond and I said, okay, those are what they hear and what they see. Now, what should they smell? And so I had them walk into the smell of coffee and homemade cookies. And so they felt right at home. And so what I realized is that every single part of the experience, from the moment they showed up to my training facility to the moment they left, everything that they saw, felt, touched, smelled, heard, everything needed to be a design. And I'm not just talking about having cookies and coffee. I'm talking about every single thing that we did in the classroom. Everything they saw, felt, touched, heard, and smelled was a design. And that design was to give them the best possible experience. And then on top of that, all of my training, my entire PowerPoint was 3 slides. We need to focus on giving our students something that they can remember, and they remember more about what they're experiencing than information. So when we sit our students, like the classroom that I went through, when we sit our students in front of a PowerPoint and we try to teach them guns, right? And this is a challenge in a state like New York and California, where in order to touch a gun, you have to go through a class in order to go through, to even touch a gun in the first place. But it is still possible with other training aids. But we need to use hands-on training as often as possible. If my students were not on a gun, where if they were not hands-on on a firearm in the classroom within the first 15 minutes of class, I was doing the wrong thing. So even when I was discussing law and hypothetical situations or whatever the case would be, I always did it in what the NRA calls total participant involvement, where I would ask a broad question and have the students respond. So if somebody would ask a question like, what happens if somebody comes into our house and they're unarmed? I would ask the question to the group, and I would ask that question. And that's how I would teach, right? And so giving the best experience, if you guys are giving a PowerPoint and your PowerPoint is more than 3 slides, I would start investigating and saying, do I need this slide? Do I need this PowerPoint? Do I need this part of the PowerPoint in order to make my point? Can I make my point without that slide? And further, can I provide a better experience by giving somebody the tools and a training aid? Right? And the NRA instructor training class, and a lot of you out there are USCCA, so no bashing on them. I just happen to be an NRA instructor and an NRA training counselor. But in that method, right, in total participant involvement, the question I ask when I certify a new instructor is, when should we use a training aid? as firearm instructors, when should we use a training aid? And the answer is, if we can use a training aid, we should. If we can, we should, because we need to give the best possible experience. And this is above and beyond. So at a gun store, if you've got a gun store, what I want you to start working on your employees with is remembering the name of the person that walks through the door and shaking their hand and saying, I'm glad you're here. If you're just a firearm instructor and you've got students coming to your class, I want you to shake their hand and say, I'm glad that you're here. Just like you do on Sunday morning at church, where you have a greeter at the door greeting you. Why are they doing that? Because they're trying to add to your experience. The very first fundamental about training 30,000 people, changing your community, changing the world, making America a better, safer place to live, is that we have to give the students a unique experience. We cannot be death by PowerPoint anymore. They need to have the best possible time in your business, because your business is not just competing with other gun businesses. Your business is competing for the discretionary spend, i.e. the money, the extra spend that these people have with entertainment businesses or restaurants or anything of that nature, right? And so we need to not just compete with other firearm instructors, but other businesses out there. The best grocery store down here in Florida is a grocery store called Publix. I love going to Publix. Every time I walk in, I am greeted with a smile, as if these people know me personally. And they say, hi, how are you today? And if I'm looking around in an aisle, they'll come up behind me, not in a creepy way, but they'll say, can I help you find something? You know, did you find everything? And then when I get up to place my, put all of my products on the cart for it to be, for me to make my purchase, they say, did you find everything you were looking for? And I feel like they're only doing that to me. Like I'm the only person in the world that matters. And what we need to do as instructors, if we want to get to a point where our business is producing the best possible results and we are making the biggest impact on the community, it starts with the experience. From the moment they see your ad to the moment they leave your training facility, everything that they see, feel, hear, touch, and smell should be a design by you to give the best possible experience. And so that's how that started, is that I needed my students to feel at home, even though they had to drive a quarter mile into the woods at night. And that's why I had the warm cookies, the bright lights. I had signage all the way down the driveway to make sure that they knew that they were in the right place. That's what we need to do first and foremost, is give a great experience while we're teaching.